Stop scrolling, because this rumor just tore through celebrity timelines like a live wire, and people don't know whether to be shocked, skeptical, or straight up furious. Teyana Taylor's name is suddenly back in the middle of a storm, not for music, fashion, or film, but for Breakup fans swear happened overnight. And the reason being whispered everywhere. A leak that allegedly flipped everything behind the scenes and ended a relationship before it ever had a chance to go public. According to what's circulating online, Teyana quietly walked away from Pierre after private information surfaced that sparked explosive speculation about his personal life. Not a cheating scandal. Not a public argument. A leak, screenshots, messages, and whispered claims that sent the internet into full investigation mode. And once those rumors hit, fans say the shift was immediate. Appearances stopped. Energy changed. Silence fell. The internet did what it always does. It filled in the blanks fast. Some claim the leak involved a rumored same-sex relationship that Aaron never intended to be public. Others say the issue wasn't orientation at all, but trust, who knew what, who leaked it, and who got blindsided when private life turned into public spectacle. And that distinction matters, because this story isn't just about who someone loves. It's about boundaries being shattered. What makes this so volatile is how abruptly everything ended. No statement. No unfollow drama. No messy back and forth. Just distance. And when Teyana Taylor goes quiet, people listen harder. Fans are split, some defending her right to walk away from chaos, others accusing the internet of weaponizing rumors that never should have surfaced. But once you hear what insiders claim allegedly happened right before the split, and why Teyana's silence might actually be the loudest response of all, you'll understand why this story isn't about gossip anymore. It's about privacy, betrayal, and how fast a leak can burn everything to the ground. The moment this rumor surfaced, it didn't creep, it crashed. 1 minute, Teyana Taylor and Pierre were being whispered about as a low-key, private pairing that never needed validation. The next, their names were fused together in a narrative that felt explosive, invasive, and impossible to contain. And what made it hit harder wasn't just what was being rumored, but how fast everything allegedly ended once that information leaked. People first noticed something was off when the energy changed overnight. Not gradually. Not subtly. Abruptly. Appearances that were expected didn't happen. Mutual circles went quiet. Any momentum fans thought they sensed just stopped. No breakup announcement. No cryptic heartbreak posts. Just a clean, uncomfortable silence that suggested something had gone very wrong very fast. Then came the whispers. According to online chatter and so-called insider accounts, private information about Pierre's personal life allegedly surfaced without his consent. Screenshots. Messages. Claims passed around in group chats before ever hitting public timelines. The internet immediately zeroed in on one angle, speculation about a same-sex relationship that Aaron had never publicly addressed. Important detail, none of this came with confirmation. No statement. No admission. Just rumor layered on rumor, accelerating faster than facts ever could. What shocked fans wasn't just the content of the speculation. It was the alleged reaction. Multiple gossip accounts claimed that once the leak reached Teyana, the relationship ended almost immediately. No public confrontation. No explanation. Just distance. And that speed is what set comment sections on fire, because people began asking why. Supporters of Teyana argued it wasn't about sexuality at all. They insisted it was about trust. About being blindsided by a leak so personal it threatened to turn a private life into a spectacle. From that perspective, the issue wasn't who Aaron may or may not have dated, it was the chaos that followed the leak. The loss of control. The realization that something deeply personal had escaped into a world that feeds on misinterpretation. Critics weren't as generous. They accused the internet of projecting motives onto Teyana without evidence. They warned against framing her silence as judgment. But at the same time, others pushed an even uglier narrative, suggesting the split implied discomfort or rejection. That angle ignited backlash immediately, because it leaned on assumptions no one could prove and no one should be making lightly. What complicated everything was Teyana's silence. She didn't clarify. She didn't deny. She didn't redirect. And silence in situations like this becomes a Rorschach test. People see what they already believe. Supporters saw discretion. Critics saw avoidance. Opportunists saw permission to speculate. Meanwhile, Pierre stayed just as quiet. No rebuttal. No plea for privacy. No attempt to shut the rumor down publicly. That mutual silence created a vacuum, and the internet rushed to fill it with theories that grew more extreme by the hour. Some claimed the leak wasn't even accurate, just exaggerated fragments weaponized for attention. Others claimed it was real but irrelevant, blown out of proportion by people desperate for scandal. Old interviews were dragged back into circulation. Comments about privacy. About boundaries. About living off-screen. Suddenly, everything sounded prophetic. Fans dissected body language, past friendships, career choices, trying to retroactively prove a narrative that hadn't even been confirmed. It was confirmation bias in real time. What made this first wave especially volatile was how quickly the conversation crossed from curiosity into entitlement. People argued as if they were owed answers about someone's personal life. About labels. About identity. About why a relationship ended. And in that rush, the line between analysis and intrusion vanished completely. Insiders claiming proximity to the situation pushed back against the ugliest takes. They alleged the split, if it happened at all, had nothing to do with sexuality and everything to do with betrayal of privacy. That Teyana values control over her narrative above all else, and once a situation threatened to drag her into a viral storm, she didn't authorize, she stepped away. Cleanly. Quietly. Without theatrics. That explanation resonated with people who understood her history. Teyana has always been fiercely protective of her private life. She's spoken openly about boundaries, about how the public only sees what she chooses to show. From that lens, walking away from a situation that suddenly became unstable wasn't judgment, it was self-preservation. Still, the damage was done. The rumor had taken on a life of its own. Even people urging caution repeated it while warning others not to believe it. The name Pierre became linked to speculation he never confirmed. And that association alone was enough to shift perception, regardless of truth. By the end of this first wave, the story had already fractured into multiple competing versions. In one, Teyana dumped Aaron over a leaked secret. In another, there was never a confirmed relationship at all. In another, the entire situation was a misunderstanding inflated by internet obsession. And in all of them, two real people lost control of how their names were being used. What lingered most wasn't outrage. It was discomfort. The uneasy realization that privacy can be destroyed in minutes, and once it is, every decision afterward is interpreted as motive. Silence becomes guilt. Distance becomes judgment. And rumors, once released, don't need truth to keep moving. This wasn't a breakup story with a clear villain or victim. It was a collision between speculation and reality, and it had only just begun. The second wave didn't escalate because of new information. It escalated because people began choosing which version of the story they wanted to believe, and then defending it like fact. At that point, the rumor was no longer floating. It had split into narratives, each one revealing more about the audience than about the people involved. One narrative hardened quickly, that Teyana Taylor ended things the moment the leak reached her, and that the leak itself involved deeply personal speculation about Pierre's private life. In this version, the speed of the alleged breakup was treated as evidence. Not proof, evidence. And that distinction mattered, because the internet began treating timing as intention. Fast exit equaled judgment. Silence equaled confirmation. And that logic took off with terrifying momentum. Another narrative pushed back, just as aggressively. Supporters argued there was never a confirmed relationship to end in the first place. That fans had connected dots that didn't exist, then turned absence into conclusion. From this angle, nothing was dumped, nothing was rejected, and the entire scandal was a projection built on gossip accounts chasing clicks. But once a story becomes emotionally charged, logic struggles to compete with instinct. What made this phase especially volatile was how the conversation drifted into territory it had no business occupying. People weren't just speculating about a relationship anymore. They were speculating about identity. Labels were being assigned without consent, confirmation, or consideration of harm. And while many commenters tried to correct that behavior, the correction often repeated the rumor in the process, spreading it further under the guise of critique. Advocates and observers began calling out the danger of that pattern. They pointed out that speculating about someone's sexuality based on leaks or screenshots isn't progressive, it's invasive. That even framing it as discussion normalizes outing culture. That privacy violations don't become acceptable just because the subject is a public figure. These warnings circulated widely, and were ignored just as widely. Teyana's silence took on even more weight in this phase. People stopped asking what happened and started asking why she wasn't clarifying. For some, her refusal to speak was interpreted as quiet confirmation of the ugliest assumptions. For others, it was the only responsible response, refusing to dignify invasive speculation with oxygen. The same silence was being used to argue completely opposite conclusions. Pierre's continued quiet became even more complicated. Some praised him for not feeding the fire. Others accused him of letting a damaging narrative grow unchecked. But buried beneath those takes was a harder truth. Speaking out might not have stopped anything. In an environment where rumors thrive on ambiguity, any statement risks being twisted, misquoted, or weaponized. Insiders claiming knowledge of the situation attempted to reframe the discussion. They alleged the real fracture point, if there was one at all, wasn't orientation or identity, it was trust. They suggested that private information had circulated without consent, creating a sense of exposure and instability that made proximity impossible. In that framing, the issue wasn't who someone loved. It was who leaked, who knew, and who lost control. That explanation resonated with people familiar with Teyana's public history. She has long emphasized autonomy over her image and boundaries around access. From that perspective, any situation that suddenly threatened to drag her into a viral storm she didn't authorize would be a deal-breaker, regardless of the content. The internet, however, preferred the simpler, more sensational version. The discourse grew uglier as extremes took over. Some accused Teyana of intolerance without evidence. Others accused critics of manufacturing outrage out of thin air. Nuance disappeared. The possibility that multiple truths could coexist, that privacy was violated, that rumors were exaggerated, that silence was intentional, was drowned out by louder, more polarized takes. What made this phase especially damaging was how quickly speculation turned into shorthand. Comments referencing the situation no longer explained it. They assumed shared understanding. "You know why" became a common phrase. That kind of shorthand doesn't inform, it poisons. It allows assumptions to travel without challenge, embedding themselves into reputation by repetition alone. Media outlets largely stayed cautious, avoiding definitive claims. But even caution couldn't stop the bleed-through. Headlines danced around implications. Phrases like "rumored leak" and "alleged fallout" still carried enough charge to keep the story alive. Every article that tried to debunk misinformation still repeated the names, reinforcing the association it aimed to dismantle. As the days passed, something subtler happened. The outrage cooled, but the association stuck. People stopped arguing and started assuming. That's the most dangerous phase of any rumor, when it no longer needs to be defended, because it's simply accepted as background noise. Not confirmed. Just there. By the end of this second wave, the story had shifted again. It wasn't about what happened. It was about how quickly the internet felt entitled to decide why it happened. How easily silence was treated as evidence. How readily privacy was sacrificed for narrative satisfaction. And hanging over everything was an uncomfortable realization. Even if the truth was simple, clean, and harmless, it might never fully matter. Because once a rumor attaches itself to identity, correcting it becomes almost impossible. The damage doesn't come from confirmation. It comes from circulation. This wasn't a story spiraling toward clarity. It was spiraling toward permanence, the kind that lingers quietly, resurfacing whenever names trend again. And with no statements forthcoming, no lines drawn, and no appetite for restraint, it was clear the hardest part was still ahead, living with a narrative neither side created, but both would be forced to carry. By the time the third wave settled in, the story had stopped behaving like gossip and started behaving like a lesson in how narratives calcify without consent. Not because anything new was confirmed, nothing was, but because the internet had already decided what felt true. And once a feeling becomes consensus, facts struggle to catch up. What lingered most wasn't outrage anymore. It was assumption. Casual references. Side comments. The kind of shorthand that doesn't explain itself, because it assumes everyone already knows. That's when reputational damage becomes permanent. Not through headlines, but through implication. People weren't asking questions anymore. They were making statements disguised as jokes, hints, or "everybody knows." Teyana Taylor's continued silence became the most dissected element of all. At first, people demanded she speak. Now, they argued over what her silence meant. Some insisted it proved she wanted nothing to do with the narrative, that she refused to participate in outing culture or validate invasive speculation. Others argued the opposite, that refusing to clarify allowed harmful assumptions to spread unchecked. Both sides spoke with certainty, and neither had proof. What got lost in that debate was a quieter truth. Sometimes silence isn't indecision. It's refusal. Refusal to explain private boundaries. Refusal to turn someone else's personal life into public content. Refusal to correct rumors that never should have existed in the first place. But refusal doesn't translate well online. The internet reads refusal as mystery, and mystery invites invention. Pierre's position became even more precarious. With his name now permanently linked to speculation he never addressed, his quiet was no longer interpreted as dignity by everyone. For some, it became suspicious. For others, it was the only safe option in a culture that weaponizes statements. Speaking could have escalated. Silence allowed the storm to pass, but it didn't clear the air. Industry voices began warning about the long-term cost of moments like this. They pointed out that rumors tied to identity don't fade like other scandals. They linger in search results, in casting conversations, in the unspoken biases that shape opportunity. Even when baseless, the association itself becomes an obstacle. And obstacles don't need to be fair to be effective. The conversation finally shifted toward ethics. Not just what happened, but why are we so comfortable speculating like this? Why did people feel entitled to dissect someone's identity based on leaks, whispers, and screenshots? Why was the possibility of a same-sex relationship treated as scandal rather than personal truth, even when unconfirmed? That question made people uncomfortable, because it forced a reckoning with how easily progressivism becomes voyeurism online. Some fans began walking back their earlier certainty. They admitted they'd jumped to conclusions. That they'd assumed motives without evidence. That they'd participated in spreading something they now felt uneasy about. Those admissions were quieter than the original outrage, but they mattered. They revealed cracks in the confidence that had fueled the rumors spread. Others doubled down. They argued that public figures invite scrutiny by existing in the spotlight. That privacy is a privilege forfeited by fame. That silence is part of the game. Those arguments were met with pushback from advocates who pointed out that being visible doesn't mean being owned. That access to art or performance doesn't equal access to identity. That consent still matters, even when the internet disagrees. As the noise faded, the residue remained. Comments under unrelated posts still referenced the situation obliquely. Jokes still landed. Assumptions still traveled. No one was loudly accusing anymore, but no one was correcting either. The story had entered its afterlife, where it would resurface anytime either name trended, stripped of context, but heavy with implication. The most sobering realization was how little the truth mattered at this stage. Even if a clear explanation emerged tomorrow, it wouldn't reach everyone who'd absorbed the rumor. Corrections never travel as far as speculation. That imbalance is the internet's quiet cruelty. It rewards the first, loudest story, not the most accurate one. Teyana's brand, built on control, intention, and autonomy, now carried a narrative she never authorized. Aaron's name, previously unlinked to this kind of scrutiny, now bore an association he never confirmed. Neither created the story. Neither controlled it. Both were forced to live with its echoes. And that's where this chapter settled. Not with confirmation. Not with denial. With unease. The understanding that privacy can be breached in minutes and never fully restored. That silence, while protective in the moment, doesn't erase what's already been said. And that the internet rarely pauses to consider the human cost of its curiosity. This wasn't a breakup exposé with a clear ending. It was a collision between speculation and reality, between entitlement and boundaries, between rumor and responsibility. And the damage didn't come from truth, it came from circulation. The story didn't end with clarity. It ended with a question that lingered uncomfortably beneath every take. At what point does discussion become harm? Because once a narrative about identity escapes into the wild, it doesn't matter how it started. What matters is how long it's allowed to live, and how many people are willing to question whether it should have existed at all. Before you scroll away, pause, because this is exactly how stories like this harden into something they were never meant to be. What happened here isn't just celebrity chatter. It's a live example of how quickly speculation turns into assumption, and how easily privacy gets sacrificed for narrative satisfaction. If this situation made you uncomfortable, conflicted, or forced you to question how fast we all jump to conclusions, don't ignore that reaction. Hit like so this conversation doesn't get drowned out by louder, more reckless takes. Drop a comment and share how you think moments like this should be handled, where curiosity ends and boundaries begin. And subscribe now, because these stories don't actually end when the noise dies down. They resurface, quietly, the next time a name trends. Engagement matters here. Silence lets harmful narratives settle in without challenge. Discussion, thoughtful discussion, is the only thing that slows that process down. Once the internet moves on, it almost never comes back to correct what it got wrong. This isn't about picking sides, or proving rumors right or wrong. It's about recognizing the cost of speculation, especially when it involves identity, privacy, and consent. Years from now, people will still reference moments like this without remembering how shaky the foundation was. Stay locked in. Stay critical. And don't let gossip replace empathy just because the people involved are famous. Because once a rumor attaches itself to someone's name, undoing it is far harder than spreading it, and that responsibility belongs to everyone watching.